Here's something nobody tells you. Your mind isn't stuck. It's not locked into some permanent version of itself that you just have to accept and live with forever. That story you've been telling yourself about being a slow learner, about having a terrible memory, about never quite getting things to stick, that's not biology. That's habit. And habits can change. Right now, while you're listening to this, your brain is rebuilding itself. Literally. Neurons are firing, connections are forming, pathways are strengthening or fading based on what you pay attention to. Your mind is not a static thing. It's a living, breathing system that responds to how you use it. And if you've been using it the wrong way, if you've been fighting against its nature instead of working with it, then everything about learning has probably felt harder than it needs to be. But what if I told you that learning faster and remembering longer isn't about being smarter? What if it's just about understanding how your brain actually works and then giving it what it needs to perform? What if the difference between someone who seems to absorb everything effortlessly and someone who forgets what they learned yesterday isn't talent, it's strategy? This isn't going to be another lecture about discipline or willpower or forcing yourself to study harder. This is about something deeper. This is about rewiring the way your mind processes the world so that learning stops feeling like a battle and starts feeling like flow. Stick with me, because what you're about to discover will change the way you think, learn, and remember for the rest of your life. Introduction. Your mind is your greatest asset. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you learned something new and it actually stayed with you? Not just for a day or a week, but long enough to use it, to build on it, to let it change the way you think or work or solve problems? For most people, the answer is uncomfortable. We consume information constantly. Articles, podcasts, videos, books, courses. We take it all in. We feel productive. We feel informed. But a month later, when someone asks us what we learned, we draw a blank. The information passed through us like water through a sieve. We were there, we were listening, but somehow nothing stuck. And that's frustrating, because deep down, you know that the quality of your life is directly connected to the quality of your thinking. The sharper your mind, the better your decisions. The faster you learn, the quicker you adapt. The longer you remember, the more you can build on what you know instead of starting from scratch every single time. Your mind is the single greatest multiplier you have. When it operates at full capacity, everything accelerates. Your skills improve faster. Your understanding deepens quicker. Your confidence grows stronger. But when your mind operates below its potential, when you're constantly forgetting, constantly relearning, constantly struggling to focus, everything slows down. Progress becomes exhausting. Growth feels impossible. The problem isn't that you're not capable. The problem is that nobody ever taught you how to learn. School taught you what to learn, history, math, science, but it never taught you the mechanics of learning itself. It never explained how attention works, how memory forms, how knowledge becomes skill. You were just expected to figure it out on your own, and most people never do. But here's the beautiful truth. Your mind is far more adaptable than you've been led to believe. It's not fixed. It's not maxed out. It's not too old, too slow, or too damaged to improve. Your brain has the ability to reorganize itself, to strengthen what you use and prune what you don't. Scientists call this neuroplasticity. But you don't need to memorize the term to benefit from the reality. What you need to understand is this: the brain you have today is not the brain you're stuck with tomorrow. It can get sharper, it can get faster, it can become more reliable. And the process of upgrading it isn't complicated. It just requires the right inputs, the right habits, and the right understanding of how this incredible system actually works. In this audiobook, we're going to explore how to transform your mind into a learning machine, not through tricks or hacks, but through real science-backed strategies that align with how your brain is designed to function. You're going to learn why attention comes before memory, why understanding beats memorization, why retrieval is more powerful than repetition, and how simple shifts in how you approach learning can create results that last for years. More importantly, you're going to discover how to apply all of this in real life, not just in theory, but in practice, so you can build a mind that gives you an unfair advantage in everything you do. This isn't about becoming a genius. This is about becoming a strategic learner, someone who knows how to absorb information efficiently, store it reliably, and retrieve it when it matters most. Someone who doesn't just consume knowledge, but transforms it into capability. Someone who treats their mind like the powerful instrument it is and takes responsibility for maintaining it, upgrading it, and protecting it. If you commit to this process, the payoff will follow you for the rest of your life. Because once you learn how to learn, everything else becomes easier. Every skill you want to build, every challenge you want to solve, every goal you want to reach becomes more achievable. So let's begin. Let's unlock the framework for learning faster, remembering longer, and building a brain that keeps improving year after year. This is your opportunity to step into the identity of a lifelong learner, a person who turns knowledge into power and power into progress. Let's dive in. Chapter 1. Build a mind that absorbs effortlessly. Here's the first thing you need to accept. Your mind isn't broken. It's just untrained. Think about it like this. Imagine someone handed you a musical instrument you've never played before and expected you to perform a symphony. You'd struggle, right? Not because you're incapable of making music, but because you haven't learned how the instrument works. You don't know which keys to press, which strings to pluck, or how to control the sound. That's what most people are doing with their brain. They're trying to force it to perform without understanding its mechanics. They're cramming information, hoping something sticks. They're rereading the same material over and over, thinking repetition equals retention. They're multitasking, believing they can absorb multiple streams of information at once. And then they wonder why learning feels so hard. But learning doesn't have to be hard. It just has to be efficient. And efficiency starts with understanding that your mind is a living, dynamic system. It's not a filing cabinet where you shove facts and hope they stay organized. It's more like a garden. What you plant, water, and tend to will grow. What you ignore will wither. Your brain loves patterns. It learns best when information connects rather than floats in isolation. When you understand how ideas relate to each other, your mind forms networks of meaning. These networks become shortcuts. They make it easier to retrieve knowledge later, to use it in new situations, and to build new ideas on top of old ones. That's what efficient learning looks like. Ideas stacking on ideas. knowledge compounding instead of evaporating. But to get there, you need to give your brain three essential ingredients: attention, clarity, and structure. Attention focuses the mind on what matters. Without it, information never even makes it through the gate. You can read 100 pages, but if your attention isn't present, none of it encodes. Your eyes move, your brain registers shapes, but nothing sticks because you weren't truly there. Clarity makes information meaningful. When something makes sense, when it connects to something you already know, your brain treats it differently. It assigns value to it. It prioritizes it. But when information feels abstract, disconnected, or irrelevant, your mind discards it almost immediately. Structure keeps knowledge accessible. Random facts are nearly impossible to recall. But structured knowledge, knowledge organized into categories, frameworks, or systems, is easy to navigate. Structure is what separates someone who knows a lot from someone who can actually use what they know. When you combine these three elements, learning transforms. It becomes faster, smoother, and more enjoyable. Your mind stops resisting and starts cooperating. But there's another shift that's equally important, and it's one most people overlook. You need to understand the difference between recognition and recall. Recognition is when you see something and think, "Oh yeah, I know this." It's passive. It's comfortable. Your brain loves it because it feels easy. But recognition is weak. It doesn't build strong memory. It just creates the illusion of knowing. Recall, on the other hand, is when you pull information out of your mind without any cues, without any hints, without someone reminding you. Recall is active, it's effortful, it's uncomfortable, but it's also powerful. Every time you retrieve something from memory, you strengthen that pathway. You make it faster, more durable, more reliable. Efficient learners train recall. They don't just reread their notes and feel satisfied. They close the book and test themselves. They force their brain to work, to search, to reconstruct the information from scratch. That effort is what makes learning stick. Efficiency also means reducing cognitive waste. Every distraction, every notification, every mental detour steals processing power from your brain. When your mind is scattered, learning slows to a crawl. When your mind is centered, learning accelerates. This is why your environment matters. This is why your habits matter. This is why the systems you build around learning matter. They protect your brain from unnecessary friction, so learning can flow naturally. And here's something most people don't realize. Efficiency depends on identity. If you see yourself as someone who learns quickly, your brain adapts to that expectation. If you see yourself as someone who struggles, your brain adapts to that as well. The brain listens to the story you repeat about yourself. So choose a better story. Say it often. Live into it. You don't need more courses. You don't need more motivational speeches. What you need is a mind built for efficiency, a mind that absorbs without resistance, organizes without chaos, and recalls with ease. When you build that kind of mind, learning stops feeling like a chore and starts feeling like a superpower. And once that shift happens, everything else becomes easier. Your career accelerates, your confidence grows, your thinking sharpens, because you're no longer fighting your brain. You're working with it. And when you work with your brain instead of against it, there's no limit to what you can achieve. Chapter 2. Master the skill nobody teaches. Let me tell you something that might surprise you. The reason you forget things isn't because your memory is weak. It's because your attention was never there in the first place. Think about the last time you read something and got to the end of the page only to realize you had no idea what you just read. Your eyes moved across the words, your brain registered the shapes, but you weren't present. You were thinking about something else, worrying about a deadline, replaying a conversation, planning your next meal, and because you weren't paying attention, nothing encoded. Attention is the gatekeeper of learning. If information doesn't make it through the gate, it never becomes memory. It doesn't matter how interesting the topic is, how intelligent you are, or how badly you want to learn. Without attention, nothing sticks. And yet, attention is the skill almost no one trains. We spend hours trying to memorize things, hoping our brain will cooperate, when the real bottleneck is earlier in the process. Memory isn't the first step. Attention is. Here's the thing about attention that most people don't understand. It's not just about focus. It's about eliminating competition. Your brain cannot fully attend to multiple things at once. Multitasking is a myth, at least when it comes to deep learning. When you try to juggle multiple streams of information, your brain switches rapidly between them, giving superficial attention to everything and deep attention to nothing. Every switch carries a cost, a cognitive cost. Your brain has to reload context, reorient itself, and rebuild focus. And all of that switching slows comprehension, weakens memory, and drains mental energy. Efficient learners understand this. They trade multitasking for monotasking. One task, one focus, one channel of mental energy at a time. It sounds simple, but it's revolutionary. Because when your brain isn't divided, it performs at a completely different level. Training attention starts with eliminating noise. Mental noise, digital noise, environmental noise. Learning in a state of distraction is like trying to plant seeds in a windstorm. You can throw as many seeds as you want, but very few will take root. One of the simplest ways to upgrade attention is to control your environment before you begin. Remove optional distractions. Put your phone in another room. Silence notifications. Clear visual clutter. These small adjustments send a signal to your brain that something important is about to happen. And your brain responds by allocating more resources. But attention isn't just environmental, it's also internal. Your mind has its own distractions: rumination, anxiety, anticipation, daydreaming. These internal disruptions are often more powerful than external ones because you carry them with you everywhere. The key here is what I call cognitive presence, training your brain to stay in the moment long enough for learning to occur. And you build this the same way you build physical endurance, progressively. Start with short blocks of focused attention and expand them over time. 10 minutes of deep, uninterrupted attention can be far more valuable than an hour of half-distracted drifting. Quality always beats quantity when it comes to learning. Another critical element of attention is intention. When your brain knows why it should care about something, it pays more attention to it. Learning becomes deeper, faster, and more durable when you give your mind a target. Before you dive into any material, ask yourself a few simple questions. What am I trying to learn? What do I want to remember? Why does this matter to me? These aren't just motivational tricks. They prime your brain for relevance, and your brain remembers what it considers relevant. Attention also improves through active engagement. If you sit back and passively consume content, your brain will wander. It's like giving a child nothing to do and expecting them not to get bored. The brain is built to participate, not just observe. You can activate engagement through simple techniques, asking questions while you learn, pausing to summarize what you just absorbed, imagining how you'd explain the idea to someone else, or connecting the new information to something you already know. These small acts tell your brain, this matters, stay here, and your brain listens. There's also a physical dimension to attention that people often ignore. Your brain's attentional circuits run on energy. Sleep, hydration, nutrition, and movement all influence how much attention you have available. You might blame yourself for lacking focus when the real issue is that your brain is underfueled or overstressed. A tired brain learns slowly. A stressed brain learns defensively. A nourished, rested brain learns freely. Treat attention as a resource, something you can protect, invest in, and replenish. But here's the most powerful truth about attention. It's a choice. You choose what to give your mind to. You choose what gets access to your time. You choose what you allow to interrupt you. And over time, these choices become habits. Some people build attentional strength, deep, steady, unshakable mental presence. Others build attentional weakness, fragmented, reactive, easily hijacked focus. Both are trained. One leads to clarity and competence. The other leads to confusion and cognitive fatigue. If you want to upgrade your memory, begin by upgrading your attention, because memory is downstream of attention. If attention is sharp, memory is possible. If attention is dull, memory collapses. This simple truth will save you years of frustration. You don't have to force your brain to remember things. You don't have to rely on brute force repetition. When your attention is present, your brain does the encoding naturally, automatically, effortlessly. So train your attention first. Give it structure. Give it protection. Give it purpose. When you do, learning becomes faster, memory becomes stronger, and knowledge begins to stay with you instead of slipping away. And once that happens, you'll realize that attention was never just a cognitive skill. It was a competitive advantage all along. Chapter 3. Transform data into real understanding. Here's a question for you. How many books have you read that you can't remember? How many courses have you taken where you felt inspired in the moment but can't recall a single key idea a month later? How much information have you consumed that left absolutely no trace? If you're like most people, the answer is uncomfortable, because we live in a world that rewards consumption. We collect information the way some people collect souvenirs. We read an article, highlight a few sentences, feel intellectually stimulated, and then move on. We finish a book, feel accomplished, and immediately start the next one. We binge courses, take notes, and never look at them again. The result? We accumulate information but rarely develop understanding. And there's a massive difference between the two. Information is everywhere. It's abundant, accessible, and easy to collect. Understanding is rare. Understanding takes work. Understanding requires depth. But understanding is what your brain actually remembers, uses, and applies. Data without meaning slips away. Data without context evaporates. But when information becomes understanding, when it integrates into your mental framework, it sticks. It becomes part of how you think, how you solve problems, how you see the world. The reason so many people forget what they learn is simple. They collect information without processing it. They stay on the surface. Shallow learning feels productive. It creates the illusion of progress. But it doesn't produce real knowledge. It produces familiarity. And familiarity fades fast. Understanding begins with depth. And depth means slowing down long enough for your brain to process what something actually means. Most people rush through content because they want to consume more. They want to finish the book, complete the course, check the box. But learning isn't about finishing, it's about absorbing. It's about integrating. Your brain needs time to convert information into personal knowledge. When you slow down, you give your mind the chance to ask the most important learning question. How does this fit into what I already know? Your brain builds understanding through connection. Every new idea must attach to something familiar. If there's nothing to attach to, the idea floats. It becomes trivial, interesting, but unanchored. That's why knowledge compounds faster once you have a foundation. The more you know about a topic, the easier it becomes to learn more about that topic. Learning isn't linear. It's exponential once the base is in place. One of the best ways to deepen understanding is to look for mental models. Mental models are structures that explain how something works. They simplify complexity without oversimplifying the truth. They help you take raw information and organize it into something meaningful. Instead of memorizing hundreds of disconnected facts, you learn the framework behind them. This is how experts think. They don't recall endless details. They understand patterns. And when you understand patterns, details become easier to learn and easier to remember. Another key to understanding is asking better questions. Questions activate curiosity. Curiosity activates attention, and attention activates memory. Instead of passively absorbing information, ask yourself, why is this true? What problem does this solve? What's the principle behind this? What would change if this were false? Questions force your brain to engage. They force your brain to reason. And reasoning is where understanding lives. Teaching is another powerful tool for building understanding. When you teach something, even informally, you're forced to clarify your thoughts. You must fill in the gaps. You must explain the logic. Teaching exposes what you don't know and strengthens what you do. Many people believe they understand something because it feels familiar. But familiarity isn't understanding. Explanation is. The rule is simple. If you can't teach it, you don't truly understand it. Analogies and metaphors also help convert information into understanding. Your brain loves comparisons because they shrink the distance between the known and the unknown. When you compare a new concept to something familiar, you build a bridge that helps your brain cross into clarity. Some of the greatest thinkers in history used analogy as their primary teaching tool for exactly this reason. It turns complexity into something digestible. Another important element of understanding is context. Context answers the questions. When does this matter? Where does this apply? Information without context is like directions without a destination. You might know the steps, but you don't know when to use them. When you understand context, knowledge becomes usable. You begin to see opportunities to apply what you know. And application is the final stage of understanding. Once you can apply something, it becomes internalized. It becomes part of your thinking. This also explains why repetition without understanding rarely works. When you repeat something you don't understand, your brain treats it like noise. It feels forced. It doesn't stick. But when you understand something, repetition strengthens it. Understanding makes repetition efficient. Repetition makes understanding durable. Together, they form memory that lasts. To turn information into understanding, you must also avoid what I call intellectual hoarding. Intellectual hoarding is the habit of consuming more than you integrate. Content becomes entertainment instead of transformation. Your mind becomes cluttered with disconnected fragments. The cure is simple. Integrate as you go. After learning something, pause and ask yourself, how would I explain this? How does this connect to what I already know? How would I use this in real life? That pause is where learning becomes real. In the end, your brain doesn't reward you for how much information you collect. It rewards you for what you understand. Understanding is the bridge between knowledge and capability. It turns learning into usefulness. And when you build this ability, when you transform data into meaning on a consistent basis, your brain stops being a storage device and becomes an instrument for thinking. That's the upgrade you're aiming for. That's the transformation that changes everything. Chapter 4. Stop being a passenger in your own learning. Let's talk about something most people get completely wrong about learning. They think learning happens by absorbing, by sitting back, taking it all in and letting information wash over them. They watch videos, they listen to podcasts, they read books, and they assume that exposure equals education. It doesn't. Passive learning feels comfortable. It feels productive. It feels like progress. You're consuming content, so you must be learning, right? Wrong. Passive learning creates familiarity, not mastery. It gives you the illusion that you know something long before you actually do. And familiarity is fragile. It fades quickly, leaving almost nothing behind. Active learning is the opposite. Active learning forces your brain to participate. It demands engagement. It requires effort. It pushes you to think, reason, explain, retrieve, connect, apply, and evaluate. And because your brain is working, the learning becomes deeper, stronger, and far more resistant to forgetting. The difference between passive learning and active learning is the difference between watching someone cook and actually standing in the kitchen with your hands in the ingredients. Watching feels easier. Doing produces skill. Let me give you an example. Imagine you're trying to learn a new language. You could spend months watching language tutorials, listening to native speakers, absorbing grammar rules, and you'd probably feel like you're making progress. But the moment someone asks you to have a conversation in that language, you'd freeze. Because watching isn't the same as doing. Consuming isn't the same as creating. Active learning closes that gap. It forces you to use what you're learning in real time. And usage is what transforms information into ability. One of the most powerful forms of active learning is retrieval. Retrieval means pulling information out of your brain without looking at it. You're not rereading your notes. You're not rewatching the video. You're testing yourself. You're forcing your brain to reconstruct the information from memory. When you retrieve, you send a signal to your brain. This matters. Keep this. Strengthen this. Retrieval is memory training. It rewires neural circuits. It deepens recall. And yet most people avoid retrieval because it feels harder than rereading. But here's what you need to understand. Hard doesn't mean wrong. Hard often means effective. The struggle to retrieve is exactly what makes the memory stronger. Easy recall doesn't build strength. Effortful recall does. Another form of active learning is explanation. If you can explain something in simple language, without jargon, without notes, without hiding behind complexity, it means you truly understand it. When you explain, you organize ideas. You connect concepts. You simplify structure. You expose gaps. You discover whether you actually know what you think you know. This is why great teachers often learn faster than their students. Teaching forces active learning, and active learning forces growth. Application is another mode of active engagement. When you use what you learn, your brain upgrades it from theory to skill. Theory alone rarely sticks. Skills stick because your brain has seen them work in the real world. When you apply something, solve a problem, perform a task, execute a method, the learning moves from conceptual to experiential. And experience leaves cognitive residue. It lasts. Active learning can also involve questioning. Asking questions turns information into fuel for curiosity. Questions activate the mind. They create gaps that your brain wants to fill. And curiosity is one of the strongest drivers of attention and memory. Instead of asking yourself, "What did I learn?" ask, "What didn't I understand? What surprised me? What challenged what I believed? Where could this be wrong?" These questions turn knowledge into exploration instead of accumulation. Another important element of active learning is transformation. Don't just consume information, transform it. Take notes in your own words. Turn paragraphs into diagrams. Convert ideas into summaries. Break concepts into steps. Compare, contrast, categorize. Every time you reshape an idea, you deepen your grasp of it. Your brain doesn't remember what it merely touches. It remembers what it reshapes. To make learning active, you must also slow down consumption. Passive learners rush. They chase content volume instead of content value. They want to finish the book, finish the video, finish the course. But learning doesn't reward finishing. It rewards processing. If your goal is speed, you consume more. If your goal is mastery, you do less but think more. The world is full of people who have consumed mountains of information but can't explain any of it. Don't become one of them. Active learning also benefits from spacing. When you revisit information across time, your brain reinforces pathways and rebuilds recall. Spacing works best when you engage with the material actively each time. Testing yourself, explaining again, summarizing again, recalling again. Passive repetition is weak. Active repetition is powerful. Even reading can become active. Most people read passively. Their eyes move, their brain drifts, and little gets encoded. To read actively, you highlight selectively. You summarize occasionally. You pause frequently. You ask questions continuously. You make the text work. You make the ideas move. You give your brain something to do beyond scanning words. Here's another distinction to understand. Passive learning feels good in the moment, but produces little growth. Active learning feels harder in the moment, but produces lasting growth. This is true across every domain. Learning a language, mastering a skill, understanding a concept, remembering a fact, solving a problem. Your brain grows through challenge, not comfort. If your goal is to upgrade your mind, you must choose growth over ease. The brain loves efficiency, but it's built by effort. Effort is the signal for adaptation. When learning feels slightly uncomfortable, slightly effortful, slightly demanding, that's often when your brain is upgrading hardest. The shift begins with a simple change in identity. Stop seeing yourself as a consumer of information. Start seeing yourself as a transformer of information. Consumer learning leads to familiarity. Transformational learning leads to mastery. And mastery is what stays with you for life. So make learning active. Think, retrieve, explain, question, apply, transform, teach. These are the verbs of mastery. These are the habits of intelligent learners. When you adopt them, you shift from someone who takes in knowledge to someone who internalizes it. And once you reach that level, learning becomes not just faster, but permanent. Chapter 5. The Secret to Making Knowledge. Permanent. Here's something that might frustrate you. Everything you've ever learned, you've also begun forgetting. It's not your fault. It's how memory works. Your brain doesn't store information perfectly the first time you encounter it. Instead, it stabilizes memory in layers, strengthening connections through repeated exposure across time. This process explains why you remember things you use often and forget things you only touch once. Your brain is ruthlessly efficient. It keeps what seems important and discards what doesn't. And unless you actively intervene, most of what you learn will fade within days, sometimes hours. But there's a method that interrupts this process, a method that tells your brain, this is important. Keep strengthening it. It's called spaced repetition, and it's one of the most powerful tools for long-term memory. Ironically, it's also one of the most underused. Most people try to memorize through cramming. They shove large amounts of information into short bursts of time. Cramming feels productive because you can temporarily recall the material. But temporary recall isn't the goal. Retention is. Cramming produces short-term memory that fades quickly. It allows you to pass an exam today but forget everything next week. Spaced repetition does the opposite. It spreads learning over time, using intervals that grow progressively longer as the memory becomes stronger. This method aligns with how your brain naturally forgets. The science behind it is rooted in something called the forgetting curve. After learning something once, your ability to recall it drops sharply within hours or days. Most people let the memory die. Spaced repetition interrupts the curve at precisely the right moments. Just as the memory starts to weaken, you force your brain to rebuild it. Every time you retrieve something at the edge of forgetting, the memory becomes more durable. It becomes easier to recall, faster to access, and more deeply integrated into your cognitive network. There are several ways to practice spaced repetition, but they all share one principle: review information at increasing intervals. Day 1, Day 3, Day 7, Day 14, Day 30. The exact pattern may vary, but the logic stays the same. You give your brain time to forget just enough so the retrieval requires effort. That effort is crucial. Easy recall doesn't strengthen memory. Effortful recall does. The harder your brain has to work, without completely failing, the stronger the memory becomes. And here's something critical. Retrieval is not the same as rereading. Rereading feels familiar and comfortable. You look at the words again and your brain says, yes, I recognize this. Recognition feels like understanding, but it's shallow. It creates the illusion of knowledge. Retrieval asks something far more demanding. Can you recall this without looking? That question rewires neurons. That question accelerates learning. That question builds long-term memory. Spaced repetition works beautifully across domains. Musicians use it when they practice sections of a piece across days and weeks. Athletes use it when they drill fundamentals over a season. Language learners use it to lock in vocabulary. Professionals use it to master skills. The method scales because it works with how your brain naturally consolidates information. If you want to remember something for months or years, spaced repetition is the closest thing to a guarantee. Technology has made spaced repetition easier than ever. Systems like digital flashcards or apps can schedule reviews automatically. But you don't need software to apply the principle. A simple notebook, a calendar, or a review schedule works just as well. The method matters more than the tool. The structure matters more than the convenience. The point is to revisit information intentionally, not randomly. One of the hidden benefits of spaced repetition is confidence. Forgetting can feel discouraging, especially when you care about learning. You read a book, feel inspired, and then weeks later, you struggle to recall even the main ideas. Spaced repetition protects you from this discouragement. It turns knowledge into something you can rely on. When you can retrieve information on command, you feel capable, you feel intelligent, you feel in control of your learning, and confidence isn't just emotional. It's cognitive reinforcement. It creates a feedback loop that accelerates future learning. But spaced repetition has another, deeper purpose. It allows knowledge to compound. When ideas stick, they can connect to new ideas. When they connect, understanding expands. And when understanding expands, learning accelerates. This is why some people seem to learn faster as they get older. They have a knowledge base that makes new learning easier. Every new idea has something to attach to. Every concept has context. Spaced repetition builds that base. To apply this to your life, start simple. Choose a topic you care about. Something you want to keep with you, not just consume and forget. After your first exposure, review it the next day. Then review it again a few days later. Then a week later. Then a month later. Each time, don't just skim. Retrieve, explain, summarize, question, engage. Effort makes it stick. Here's the beautiful part. Once you start practicing spaced repetition, you'll notice something shift. Learning stops feeling like a race against forgetting. It starts feeling like building. You're not constantly starting from zero. You're adding layers, strengthening foundations, expanding structures. In the end, spaced repetition isn't just a learning technique. It's a philosophy. It rejects the idea that learning is a single moment. It embraces the idea that learning is a cycle. Exposure, forgetting, retrieval, strengthening, repeat. That cycle is how knowledge becomes durable. That cycle is how your brain upgrades. And if you commit to practicing it, knowledge won't just pass through your life. It will accumulate and stay. Chapter 6. Make memories stick like Velcro. Let me ask you something. Why can you remember the face of someone you met 5 years ago at a party, but you can't remember where you put your keys this morning? It's not because your memory is broken. It's because one of those experiences had something the other didn't. Association. Your brain doesn't store information in isolation. It stores information by linking it to other information. The stronger the link, the stronger the memory. When something is meaningful, emotional, surprising, vivid, funny, exaggerated, or connected to something you already know, your brain treats it differently. It stands out. It takes priority. It sticks. This is why you remember faces from years ago, but forget where you placed your keys. The face had a network of associations attached to it. A conversation, a location, a feeling, maybe a story. The keys had none. Association is the glue of memory. It turns raw data into connected knowledge, and the more you amplify association, the more easily you remember. This isn't a trick. This is how your brain is built. Your brain evolved to survive through pattern recognition, not rote memorization. When a piece of information connects to an emotion, a location, a story, or a pattern, your brain locks it in because it sees relevance. Association tells your brain this matters beyond this moment. One of the simplest forms of association is visualization. When you imagine a picture, especially a vivid or exaggerated picture, memory becomes easier. Your brain is incredible at remembering images. It struggles with abstractions. If you want to remember someone's name, let's say their name is Rose, imagine them surrounded by blooming roses, bright red petals everywhere, the smell of flowers. It takes seconds, yet it changes your ability to retrieve the information later. Your brain recalls images quickly because they activate more sensory pathways. Another powerful form of association is the memory palace, also known as the method of loci. This technique involves placing information inside an imaginary space, often a familiar location like your childhood home or your current apartment. You take the ideas, numbers, or facts you want to remember and mentally place them on objects or in rooms. Then, to recall them, you walk through the space. In your mind, this method has been used for thousands of years. Orators, scholars, and memory champions have used it to store entire speeches, long sequences, or structured content. The reason it works is because it attaches memory to something stable and spatial. Your brain remembers spaces effortlessly. Association also works through storytelling. Stories are the ultimate memory containers. A long list of facts is boring and easily forgotten. But when those same facts are embedded into a narrative, they become memorable. Stories provide cause and effect. They provide emotion. They provide context. And context tells your brain how information fits into the bigger picture. This is why you remember the plot of a movie you saw years ago, but not the list of dates you memorized for a history test. Stories give your brain something to hang on to. Chunking is another association technique. Chunking means taking multiple separate pieces of information and grouping them into a single unit. A phone number becomes easier to remember when broken into 3 chunks rather than 10 individual digits. Your working memory struggles with large amounts of ungrouped data, but when grouped, your brain can handle more because it processes the chunks as one. This is how experts in any field store extraordinary amounts of knowledge. They don't memorize more, they chunk more. Association also happens through analogy. Analogies allow you to learn something new by linking it to something you already understand. When you compare a new concept to a familiar one, your brain saves time and energy. It says, "This is like that," and in doing so, transfers understanding across domains. Teachers use analogies because they accelerate comprehension and retention at the same time. Emotion is one of the strongest associative forces. If something makes you laugh, cry, feel fear, or wonder, memory strengthens automatically. Your brain prioritizes emotionally charged experiences for survival reasons. If you can attach emotion to information, even mildly, you amplify retention. This is why motivational learning often sticks longer than dry instruction. The emotion creates an adhesive layer around the ideas. Even small associations can make a big difference. Associating a concept with a color, associating a person with a profession, associating a date with a season. These are simple memory hooks. Your brain loves hooks. The more hooks you hang knowledge on, the fewer chances it has to fall. But here's the deeper truth. Association makes learning enjoyable. It turns memory into a creative process rather than a mechanical one. When memory becomes playful, it becomes sustainable. When it becomes sustainable, it becomes powerful. You no longer feel like you're forcing information into your head. You feel like you're building a network. Because you are. To apply association in your life, you don't need to use every technique at once. Start small. When you learn something new, ask yourself, what does this remind me of? What can I connect this to? How could I visualize this? What's the story here? How would I explain this to someone using something they already know? Each question adds a hook. Each hook strengthens the memory. Memory is rarely about capacity. It's about connection. If you give your brain isolated information, it will behave like a sieve. If you give your brain connected information, it will behave like a web. And a web doesn't easily lose what it catches. When you learn to associate instead of merely memorize, your brain starts working with you instead of against you. Knowledge starts to stick. Ideas start to organize. Recall becomes faster. Understanding becomes deeper. And learning becomes something you can trust. That's the power of association. That's the shift that changes everything. Chapter 7. Stop collecting facts. Start building frameworks. Here's a trap most people fall into without even realizing it. They collect facts like they're building a library, when what they actually need is a map. Think about it. You read a book and pick up 20 interesting ideas. You watch a documentary and absorb 30 new facts. You listen to a podcast and note down 15 insights. And you feel productive. You feel like you're learning. But a month later, when someone asks you what you learned, you draw a blank. The information is somewhere in your head, but you can't access it. It's buried under the clutter. That's what happens when you accumulate without integrating. Your brain becomes a storage unit instead of a thinking machine. You have knowledge, but you can't use it. You have data, but you lack structure. Facts are isolated. Systems are connected. Facts are fragile. Systems are durable. Facts are hard to recall. Systems are easy to navigate. When you think in systems, your brain doesn't have to search through a sea of disconnected information. It uses structure, and structure makes knowledge usable. Let me give you an analogy. Imagine trying to navigate a new city. You could memorize 100 street names, and you'd still get lost. Or you could spend time understanding how the city is organized, where the main roads run, which neighborhoods connect, how landmarks relate to each other. Once you have that structure, you can navigate anywhere. The same principle applies to learning. Experts in any field don't just know more facts than beginners. They organize facts into frameworks. A framework is a mental scaffold that shows how ideas relate. When a new idea appears, an expert doesn't store it randomly. They plug it into their system. And that plug-in process is what makes the idea stick. This is why learning becomes easier the deeper you go into a subject. Once you have a system, everything has a place. New information doesn't feel overwhelming. It feels like adding another piece to a puzzle you already understand. Systems also reduce cognitive load. Your brain has limited working memory. If every new piece of information requires fresh mental effort to store, memory becomes exhausting. But when information fits into an existing system, the cost drops dramatically. Your brain loves efficiency, and systems provide it. A powerful example of a system is categorization. Categorization groups ideas based on similarity or function. The moment something is categorized, your brain assigns it relationships. It's no longer alone. It belongs to a group, and that belonging makes it easier to recall. This is why you can remember hundreds of animal names, tool names, or food names without much training. You stored them in categories over time. Your brain didn't treat dolphin as an isolated word. It treated it as part of the ocean creatures category, which connects to mammals, which connects to intelligent animals, and so on. Another type of mental system is a schema. A schema is a mental blueprint of how something works. When you have a schema, you can interpret new information faster because you already have a model for it. A chess master can glance at a board and instantly understand the strategy because they have schemas for patterns, threats, and opportunities. A beginner sees chaos because they have no system yet. Knowledge needs hierarchy. Hierarchy organizes ideas from general to specific. When you start with general concepts, you create mental hooks. Then the more specific details can attach to those hooks. Think of it like a tree. The big ideas are the trunk and branches. The details are the leaves. You can't attach leaves without branches. Many learners do the opposite. They memorize leaves with no branches to hold them. So the leaves fall off quickly. Systems also allow compression. Compression means representing large amounts of knowledge using a small number of principles. Physics compresses many phenomena into a few fundamental laws. Business strategy compresses complex decisions into frameworks. Mastery compresses complexity. When you build compression into your mental systems, recall becomes faster because your brain doesn't need to search through everything. It just retrieves the principles and expands them when needed. Building systems isn't only about academic subjects. You can build systems for learning itself. How you take notes, how you review, how you practice, how you apply. Without a system, learning becomes reactive and chaotic. With a system, it becomes deliberate and efficient. Even habits are easier when they're part of a system. A habit without a system relies on willpower. A habit within a system relies on structure. Structure wins every time. To begin building mental systems, ask yourself simple but powerful questions. How does this fit with what I already know? What category does this belong to? What principle explains this? What pattern does this follow? Where would I store this concept? Each question forces your brain to integrate instead of merely collect. Another practical step is note organization. Many people take notes that act like storage. They capture information, but never convert it. To build systems, notes should be reorganized, summarized, and connected over time. Instead of a pile of disconnected pages, you create maps, diagrams, frameworks, and summaries. You turn data into structure. The ultimate benefit of systems is transfer. Transfer is the ability to apply knowledge in new situations. When you have systems, you can use what you know across different contexts. Transfer is the real measure of learning. If you can use what you know in a different scenario, the learning has matured. Transfer is what separates memorization from intelligence. Here's what I want you to understand. Accumulating information without organizing it is like buying groceries and leaving them scattered across your kitchen counter. Sure, you have the ingredients, but can you actually cook a meal? Can you find what you need when you need it? Building mental systems is like organizing that kitchen. Everything has a place. Everything connects. And when you need something, you know exactly where to find it. In the end, building mental systems is not just about remembering more, it's about thinking better. It allows your brain to navigate complexity, handle information overload, and make decisions with clarity. When you shift from storing facts to building systems, learning stops being a burden and becomes a strategic advantage. That's how you upgrade your brain for the long term. That's how you turn knowledge into power. Chapter 8. The Fastest Way to Master Anything. Let me tell you something that might sound counterintuitive. One of the fastest ways to learn something deeply is to teach it. Most people think they need to become experts before they can teach. But the truth is reversed. Teaching is how you become an expert. Here's why. When you teach something, even informally, your brain must take what you know and reshape it. You can't hide behind familiarity. You can't rely on recognition. You have to retrieve the information, organize it, and present it in a coherent way. That process alone upgrades your memory. Retrieval strengthens recall. Organization strengthens understanding. Explanation strengthens clarity. All three are pillars of accelerated learning. Think about the last time you explained something to someone. Maybe it was a concept from work, a recipe you learned, or a story you wanted to share. You probably noticed gaps in your knowledge. Teaching exposes those gaps quickly. It shows you what you truly understand and what you only think you understand. The illusion of knowing is one of the biggest dangers in learning, and teaching destroys that illusion fast. If you can explain it clearly, you own it. If you struggle to explain it, you know exactly where to improve. Teaching also forces simplification. The ability to simplify something is one of the clearest signs of mastery. Anyone can make a simple idea sound complicated. True intellect makes a complicated idea sound simple. This is why great teachers are often the best learners. They're constantly refining their explanations until the ideas become elegant. Elegant ideas are memorable because they reduce cognitive load. They become easier to retrieve and easier to apply. Another powerful benefit of teaching is that it requires sequencing. To teach something, you must decide what comes first, what comes second, and how the ideas connect. Most people don't realize how much sequencing matters until they try to explain something that seems obvious in their own mind but makes no sense to someone else. When you teach, you build these sequences consciously. You build frameworks. You build logic. These become part of your mental systems, making new learning faster and smoother. Teaching also increases engagement. When you know you'll have to teach what you learn, you pay attention differently. You take better notes. You ask better questions. You observe structure. You look for patterns. The act of learning becomes active instead of passive. Even before you teach, the expectation of teaching pulls you into a deeper level of thought. You no longer read just to read. You read to explain, and that shift alone upgrades your brain. Some of the best learners in the world use this strategy without calling it teaching. Writers teach through words. Speakers teach through voice. Engineers teach through documentation. Researchers teach through papers. Leaders teach through mentorship. Whenever a person explains, they're teaching. And whenever they teach, they reinforce their own knowledge. Teaching also enhances transfer. Transfer means using knowledge in new situations. When you teach, especially with examples, your brain practices applying the information in different contexts. It builds bridges. It forms general principles. Transfer is where learning becomes ability, and teaching accelerates that process. It's also worth noting that teaching doesn't require an audience. You can teach to a friend, to a notebook, to a mirror, or to your future self. Some of the most effective teaching strategies are private. For example, one powerful method is the explain it back technique. After learning something, you explain it back in your own words without looking at the source. You teach the empty room. You teach your imaginary student. You teach your past self who knew nothing. The more you teach, the more you learn. Another method is to write summaries. When you summarize, you're teaching on paper. You compress information. You extract meaning. You filter noise. You decide what's essential and what's not. This filtration process is where understanding strengthens. Your brain doesn't remember everything, nor should it. Your brain remembers what is integrated. Teaching helps you integrate. Teaching also builds confidence. When you can explain something clearly, your belief in your own intelligence increases. And confidence isn't just emotional. It reinforces cognitive performance. When you believe you're capable of learning, your brain engages more deeply, takes more risks, and handles complexity better. People underestimate how much perception affects cognition. The story you tell yourself about your intelligence shapes your actual cognitive performance. Teaching gives you evidence that you understand, and that evidence rewrites the story. Now here's an important distinction. Teaching is not the same as performing. Teaching does not require perfection. It does not require charisma. It does not require status. Teaching requires intention, the intention to understand deeply enough to explain. That intention is what upgrades your brain. To apply this principle, you don't need a classroom. You need a simple rule. After you learn something, teach it, even for 5 minutes. Teach it to someone else or teach it to yourself. Do it repeatedly. Do it without notes. Do it until the explanation feels clean and effortless. At that moment, you'll know that the information has moved from the surface of your mind to the structure of your mind. Learning is not complete when you understand. Learning is complete when you can explain. That's the point where knowledge becomes part of you. That's the point where your brain upgrades. And if you adopt teaching as a habit, not as something you do occasionally, but as something you do every time you learn, you will learn faster than most people ever will. Because while they're consuming, you're constructing. While they're collecting, you're connecting. While they're memorizing, you're mastering. Teaching is the shortcut to mastery. Use it. Chapter 9. Read like you mean it. Let's talk about reading, because most people are doing it wrong. They read to finish books. They read to accumulate knowledge. They read to check boxes on their reading list. And then they wonder why nothing sticks. Why a month after finishing a book, they can barely tell you what it was about. Reading is one of the most powerful tools for upgrading your brain, but only if you read strategically. Reading without strategy leads to very little retention and even less application. Thousands of pages go through your brain and leave almost nothing behind. If your goal is to learn faster and remember longer, you must shift from reading as consumption to reading as transformation. Reading strategically begins with changing the purpose. Don't read to finish. Read to understand. Don't read to accumulate. Read to apply. Don't read to impress. Read to evolve. When the purpose changes, the way you interact with the text changes. Your brain begins scanning for structure, tools, principles, and patterns rather than trivia and quotes. You start asking different questions as you read. What's the core idea here? How does this connect to what I already know? How would I use this in the real world? These questions activate attention, and attention activates memory. Strategic readers also know that not everything deserves to be read in the same way. Some material is light and can be skimmed. Some material is dense and requires slow digestion. Some material is reference-based and best revisited instead of consumed once. Some books are not worth finishing, and quitting them frees you to spend your time on the books that actually matter. Intelligent readers don't measure success by how many books they complete, but by how much value they extract. A single well-read book can transform your thinking more than 20 rushed ones ever could. To read strategically, you must also learn how to separate signal from noise. Signal is what truly matters. The core arguments, the frameworks, the principles, the insights. Noise is everything else. The filler anecdotes, the repetition, the storytelling fluff, the decorative examples that may make the text pleasant but don't always strengthen your understanding. Many books contain one powerful idea surrounded by 200 pages of packaging. A strategic reader focuses on extracting the idea, not drowning in the packaging. Another element of strategic reading is pacing. People often rush because they want to get through material quickly. But rushing kills depth. It kills connection. It kills retention. If you read too fast, your brain cannot process deeply enough to store what you learned. Reading is not a race. The winners are the ones who retain and apply. Slow down for complexity. Speed up for simplicity. Pause when something is important. Reread when necessary. Strategic reading is a rhythm, not a sprint. Annotation is a powerful strategy as well. Highlighting alone often does nothing. Many people highlight endlessly only to never revisit what they highlighted. Annotation is different. Annotating means responding to the text, writing a note, asking a question, forming an opinion, linking an idea. When you annotate, you converse with the author. You don't merely consume the information, you interact with it. That interaction forces processing, and processing strengthens memory. Strategic readers also extract ideas into their own language. If you cannot summarize a concept cleanly in your own words, you don't fully understand it. Summaries compress knowledge. They remove fluff. They expose structure. A paragraph becomes a sentence. A complex framework becomes a simple principle. Compression is a sign of comprehension, and when you compress something, you make it easier to remember and easier to use later. But reading strategically also means being selective about what you read. The world has more information than you could consume in several lifetimes. This abundance requires filtering. Ask yourself, what do I need to learn right now? What will move me forward? What aligns with my goals? Reading randomly is better than not reading at all. But reading intentionally is many times more powerful. Intent makes learning relevant, and relevance makes learning sticky. Another essential strategy is integration. After reading, ask, how do I apply this? Where does this fit into my thinking? What actions follow from this idea? Application transforms reading from entertainment into capability. Without application, knowledge stays abstract. With application, knowledge becomes skill. Your brain remembers skills far more easily than theories. Strategic readers also revisit material. The idea that you must read something once and move on is one of the biggest myths of learning. Great books deserve multiple readings because each reading occurs with a different brain. You read once to discover. You read again to understand. You read later to integrate. Repetition at intervals turns important ideas into long-term knowledge. Repetition is not redundant. It's how memory matures. And finally, reading strategically changes how you store information. Instead of leaving it scattered across pages and highlights, you organize it into categories, mind maps, summaries, frameworks. You create mental systems so new knowledge can attach and compound. Books stop being isolated experiences and start becoming part of your thinking apparatus. When you shift from being a collector of books to being a strategist of books, reading stops being a hobby and becomes a competitive advantage. You read to learn. You learn to understand, you understand to apply, and you apply to grow. That cycle is how you upgrade your brain. One idea at a time, one system at a time, one book at a time. But never forget, the goal isn't to read more. The goal is to absorb more, understand more, and use more. Quality always beats quantity. Always. Chapter 10. Your notes are useless unless you do this. Let me be blunt. Most people's notes are worthless. Not because they're not taking notes. They are. Pages and pages of them. Highlighted sentences, underlined paragraphs, bullet points everywhere. But a month later, those notes might as well not exist. Because they never look at them again. They never organize them. They never transform them into anything useful. Taking notes isn't the end of learning. It's the beginning. Notes are not just a record of information. They're a tool for thinking. The quality of your notes directly affects the quality of your memory and understanding. Weak notes lead to weak recall. Strong notes become an extension of your mind. And yet, most people never learn how to take notes effectively. They write down too much, too little, or the wrong things entirely. The purpose of note-taking is not transcription. It's transformation. Transcription means copying what you hear or read word for word. That requires almost no thinking, which means it produces almost no retention. Transformation involves summarizing, restructuring, interpreting, and connecting information in your own language. When you transform, your brain works harder. That work strengthens memory. The goal is simple. Take notes the way your future self will understand, not the way the original source said it. Effective note-taking begins with deciding what to capture. Not everything deserves to be written down. Notes should focus on ideas, principles, frameworks, steps, definitions, explanations, and examples, not filler. Highlight the structure of information rather than the decoration. Ask yourself, what is the author actually saying? What problem does this idea solve? How does this connect to what I already know? These questions sharpen your attention filter, and attention is the foundation of memory. One powerful shift is moving from linear notes to structured notes. Linear notes follow the order of information. Structured notes reorganize the information to match how your brain thinks. Your brain doesn't store knowledge as a long sequence. It stores it as clusters, categories, and networks. Techniques like mind mapping, outlining, and hierarchical notes mimic this structure. They reveal relationships between ideas instead of burying them. Another advanced method is the Cornell system. It divides notes into 3 sections: key ideas on the left, explanations and details on the right, and a summary at the bottom. The summary forces compression. The left column forces retrieval cues, and the main section captures content. The result is a set of notes designed not just for storage, but for later review and recall. Then there's the Zettelkasten method, popular among writers and researchers. Instead of keeping notes in bulk pages, each idea becomes its own card or note. These cards are then linked to related ideas. Over time, a network of knowledge forms. This system mirrors how your brain stores meaning, not as piles, but as webs. When you return to these notes, you're not rereading. You're navigating. That navigation strengthens connections and accelerates understanding. But the most important principle of note-taking is this: review matters. Notes you never revisit become intellectual graveyards. People often take notes as if note-taking were the final step. In reality, note-taking is the first step of consolidation. Notes are memory seeds, and review is the water. Spaced review, revisiting notes at intervals, brings them back to the surface of awareness and prevents forgetting. Even brief reviews can save hours of relearning later. Note-taking also expands cognition by extending working memory. Working memory has limited capacity. Only a few pieces of information can be actively processed at once. If you try to hold everything in your head, your brain overloads. Notes free up mental bandwidth. They allow your brain to focus on deeper thinking because temporary storage is handled externally. In this way, notes become a cognitive tool, not just a record. Another key insight: good notes should be personal. They should reflect your voice, your questions, your connections, and your interpretations. If your notes look like everyone else's, they probably didn't activate your brain enough. Add commentary, add doodles, add arrows, add comparisons, add reminders of how you could apply something. Personalization turns notes into a memory companion. The physical act of writing can also enhance memory. Handwriting slows you down just enough to force processing. Typing is faster, but can lead to verbatim capture and less thought. Neither method is universally superior. Both have strengths. Handwriting aids comprehension. Typing aids speed and organization. The right choice depends on the context and the purpose. The real danger is not how you take notes. It's not thinking while you take notes. Examples are another underutilized form of note enhancement. When you add examples, either from the text or from your own imagination, you move information toward real-world context. Context makes recall easier because it shows when and why a concept matters. Your brain remembers why more easily than what. Examples give the why. Finally, great note-taking has a purpose: to make knowledge accessible later. Notes should be designed for future retrieval. If you capture everything but can't find anything, the notes are useless. Organize by topic, theme, project, or question. Use indexes, digital tags, or searchable systems. A note you cannot retrieve is a note you effectively lost. When you learn to take better notes, you upgrade your brain in multiple dimensions. Attention increases because you listen actively. Understanding increases because you process and reorganize information. Memory strengthens because you retrieve and revisit. And application improves because you can actually find and use what you learned. In other words, note-taking is not just an academic skill, it's a life skill. It's a tool for building a smarter mind. And when you master it, you gain control over your learning in a way most people never experience. Chapter 11. Knowledge is useless until you do this. Here's a hard truth. Knowing something means nothing if you can't do something with it. You can read every productivity book ever written. You can memorize every principle of time management. You can understand the theory of focus, flow, and discipline. But if you never change how you work, what's the point? Information becomes powerful only when it turns into skill. There's a difference between knowing something and being able to do something, and most people never make the leap. They collect knowledge but never convert it. They read about communication but never improve their conversations. They study fitness but never change their health. They learn financial principles but never apply them to their money. They understand theories but never see results. Learning without application creates intellectual storage. Learning with application creates transformation. To turn knowledge into skill, you must engage with information through practice. Practice is the bridge between theory and ability. It forces you to leave the comfort of knowing and enter the discomfort of doing. Doing feels harder because it demands feedback. When you do something, you find out immediately where your knowledge is shallow or where your assumptions were wrong. Feedback feels uncomfortable, but it's the fastest instructor you'll ever meet. Books can inform you. Teachers can guide you. Feedback teaches you. Skill also requires repetition, but not blind repetition. Useful repetition is deliberate repetition. Deliberate repetition targets weaknesses, refines technique, and tracks improvement. Blind repetition simply burns time. If you practice incorrectly, you strengthen mistakes. If you practice deliberately, you strengthen skill. Deliberate practice asks the question, what specifically needs improvement, and isolates it. This is how musicians improve sections of a piece, how athletes refine movements, and how thinkers sharpen reasoning. Knowledge also becomes skill when you compress theory into action steps. Big ideas without action steps remain abstract. To make them concrete, you must identify how they appear in the real world. Ask, what does this idea look like when executed? What would be the smallest possible action for this? How would I know I'm doing it correctly? Your brain learns faster when actions are specific, observable, and trackable. A vague concept leads to vague execution. A concrete step creates behavior. To convert knowledge into skill, you must also train retrieval under real conditions. Retrieval under ideal conditions, quiet room, no pressure, plenty of time, is good for memory, but not for performance. Performance requires retrieval under friction. Athletes call this pressure testing. Pressure testing creates stress, uncertainty, time limits, or stakes. When you can retrieve knowledge under friction, you can use it in real life. This is how learning sticks at the level of identity. Identity plays a bigger role than most people realize. Skill does not become stable until it becomes part of who you are. If you learn coding techniques without seeing yourself as a developer, your improvement will plateau. If you study investment principles without adopting the identity of an investor, you won't execute consistently. Identity drives behavior. Behavior drives practice. Practice drives skill. Skill reinforces identity. This cycle is how mastery builds. Feedback loops accelerate the cycle. A feedback loop contains three components: action, result, and adjustment. You act, you evaluate the outcome, and you adjust. Many people skip the adjustment phase. They act and accept the result without learning from it. Without adjustment, skill growth is slow. Adjustment is where your brain upgrades. Adjustment tells your brain, this didn't work. Change the approach. With enough adjustments, skill stabilizes. Knowledge also becomes skill when it's used in multiple contexts. If you only use an idea in one environment, it becomes situational knowledge. To make it robust, use it in different environments, with different people, under different conditions. This forces abstraction. Abstraction means extracting the principle from the situation. Once you understand the principle, you can apply it anywhere. That's the mark of true learning. Timing matters as well. Application should follow learning quickly. The longer the delay between learning and using, the higher the chance of forgetting. Your brain prioritizes what you use. If you want to keep something, use it soon and use it often. This turns weak memories into stable ones, and stable ones into skills. The final stage of turning knowledge into skill is automation. Automation means the skill becomes effortless. You no longer think about the steps consciously. Your brain handles them in the background. Driving a car is a good example. You don't mentally rehearse every movement. You just drive. Automation frees cognitive resources, allowing you to layer new skills on top. Mastery is built on stacked automations. To apply all of this, start with a simple rule. As soon as you learn something valuable, ask, how do I put this into action today? Not next year, not someday, today. Then identify a small test. A test turns theory into motion. It breaks the perfection barrier. Perfection prevents skill because perfection delays action. Action beats perfection every time. When you learn to turn knowledge into skill, learning stops being an intellectual hobby and becomes a strategic advantage. Knowledge alone can make you feel smart. Skills make you effective. And effectiveness is what shapes your career, your competence, your confidence, and your life. Chapter 12. Build a brain that doesn't quit. If you want to learn faster and remember longer, you must upgrade not only how you learn, but the mental machinery that supports learning. Two of the most important components of that machinery are processing speed and cognitive stamina. Processing speed is your brain's ability to interpret, analyze, and manipulate information quickly. Cognitive stamina is your ability to sustain mental effort over time without burning out or slowing down. When these two abilities improve, everything across your life becomes easier. Reading becomes easier. Problem-solving becomes easier. Decision-making becomes easier. Focus becomes easier. And learning accelerates. Processing speed is not about rushing, it's about mental efficiency. A slow processor wastes energy on basic interpretation before it reaches deeper understanding. A faster processor reaches deeper understanding sooner, which leaves more time for practice, reflection, and application. This is one of the reasons why some people appear to learn faster than others. It's not always because they're more intelligent. Often, They simply process information with less friction. One way to improve processing speed is to increase working memory capacity. Working memory is the mental space where you hold information temporarily while manipulating it. It's your brain's scratch pad. If working memory is overloaded, processing slows. Tasks feel harder. Comprehension breaks down. But when working memory is strengthened, thinking becomes smoother. You can hold more pieces in mind at once. You can make connections faster. You can read complex material without constantly backtracking. Games and activities that involve pattern recognition, sequencing, spatial reasoning, or strategy can help strengthen working memory. But so can real-world thinking tasks like explaining things out loud, solving problems without notes, or mentally organizing ideas before writing them down. Another method for increasing processing speed is reducing cognitive load. Cognitive load refers to the total mental effort required for a task. When cognitive load is high, processing slows dramatically. Reducing cognitive load doesn't mean making tasks easier. It means removing unnecessary friction. For example, organizing your learning environment, minimizing distractions, breaking tasks into steps, and clarifying what you're trying to learn before you begin. Your brain processes best when it doesn't have to fight clutter, external or internal. Cognitive stamina is different but equally essential. Stamina determines how long you can think deeply before fatigue sets in. Most people can focus intensely for a few minutes before their attention dissolves. Their brain becomes restless. Their thoughts scatter. They look for breaks. Low stamina makes deep learning impossible because deep learning requires time. Complex ideas cannot be processed in shallow fragments. They need sustained engagement. To build cognitive stamina, you must train it the same way you build physical endurance, progressively. Start with short blocks of deep focus, then increase the duration as you adapt. 10 minutes of concentrated effort can later become 20, then 30, then 45, then 60. This kind of training creates a mental environment where deep work feels normal instead of painful. Once cognitive stamina increases, tasks that once felt overwhelming become manageable. Breaks play an important role here. Stamina does not grow from endless, uninterrupted effort. It grows from cycles of effort followed by recovery. Your brain needs moments of rest to consolidate information, reset attention, and replenish neurotransmitters. Micro breaks, short pauses between heavy thinking, are not wasted time. They're maintenance. They prevent burnout and enhance retention. The goal is not to eliminate breaks, but to structure them intentionally. Lifestyle also influences both processing speed and stamina. Sleep is one of the most important cognitive performance tools you'll ever have. Lack of sleep reduces reaction time, slows processing, weakens working memory, and blocks learning from transferring into long-term storage. Strong cognitive performance is built on consistent sleep, not occasional catch-up. Nutrition matters too. Your brain runs on glucose and depends on micronutrients for neurotransmitter function. Hydration matters. Oxygen matters. Movement matters. It's hard to think well in a body that isn't supported. Another often overlooked factor is stress. Stress narrows cognitive bandwidth. It reduces creativity, shrinks working memory, and slows problem solving. Chronic stress lowers processing efficiency because your brain keeps diverting resources toward threat response instead of learning. Learning thrives in environments of curiosity, not threat. To upgrade cognitive performance, You must manage stress through physical practices, through lifestyle choices, through boundaries, and through mental frameworks. Finally, the fastest way to improve both processing speed and stamina is to engage with challenging material regularly. Easy content does not strengthen your brain. Difficulty does. When you read something slightly above your current level of comprehension, or solve problems that demand new reasoning, or engage in tasks that stretch your understanding, you're training your brain. Difficulty is a signal for neural adaptation. Your brain upgrades under challenge, not comfort. When processing speed and cognitive stamina improve, learning becomes something you can rely on instead of something you have to fight for. You begin to think more clearly, understand more quickly, remember more reliably, and work more deeply. And when your mind becomes capable of sustained, efficient effort, you gain one of the greatest advantages a human can possess: the ability to keep learning long after others have given up. Chapter 13. Your brain is only as good as how you treat it. Here's something most people don't want to hear. You can have the best learning strategies in the world, but if you're not taking care of your brain, none of it matters. Learning techniques are powerful, but they mean nothing if the biological machine doing the work is exhausted, malnourished, or stressed to the breaking point. A tired brain, a stressed brain, or a poorly nourished brain cannot process efficiently, cannot remember reliably, and cannot sustain attention long enough to reach mastery. Learning is not just a cognitive activity, it's a physical one. The quality of your brain's performance reflects the quality of the environment you create for it. If you want to learn faster and remember longer, you must protect the hardware that makes it possible. One of the most important variables is sleep. Sleep is not simply rest. Sleep is neural maintenance. During deep sleep, your brain consolidates memories, stabilizes learning, clears waste byproducts, and resets neurotransmitter levels. This is why learning something late at night without sleeping afterward feels slippery and difficult to retrieve. Without sleep, your brain cannot transfer short-term learning into long-term storage. Students often try to compensate for poor learning habits by sacrificing sleep, not realizing they're destroying the very mechanism that would help them remember. Sleep is not optional for cognitive performance. It is foundational. Nutrition is another pillar of brain protection. Your brain represents only a small percentage of your body weight, yet it consumes a disproportionately high percentage of your energy. It requires stable glucose levels, healthy fats, amino acids, vitamins, and minerals to synthesize neurotransmitters and sustain cognitive function. Diets loaded with sugar spikes, processed junk, and inflammatory compounds create volatile energy patterns that impair attention and memory. In contrast, whole foods, balanced nutrients, and consistent hydration give your brain the raw materials it needs to work smoothly. Many people blame themselves for having low focus when the real issue is biochemical. You're not lazy. Your brain is underfueled. Movement also plays a crucial role. Physical activity increases blood flow to your brain, boosts oxygen levels, stimulates growth factors like BDNF, which helps neurons grow, and reduces stress hormones. Even short bouts of movement can improve mental clarity and learning capacity. Your brain and body are not separate systems. They are deeply intertwined. Physical stagnation often leads to cognitive stagnation. while physical activation enhances mental activation. Exercise is not just a fitness tool, it's a learning tool. Stress management is another category of brain protection that cannot be ignored. Stress is useful in short bursts, but destructive when chronic. Chronic stress floods your brain with cortisol, which impairs memory, disrupts learning, weakens immune function, and narrows cognitive flexibility. When stress becomes a background state, thinking becomes reactive instead of reflective. Curiosity disappears. Threat vigilance takes over. Your brain cannot build new neural pathways efficiently when it's constantly preparing for danger. Learning requires psychological safety. To reduce stress, you need both external boundaries, like limiting toxic environments, and internal practices like breathing techniques, mindfulness, journaling, or reframing stressors as challenges instead of threats. Digital hygiene has become a modern necessity for brain protection. Constant notifications, fragmented attention, information overload, and addictive platforms all tax cognitive resources. Every time you switch tasks or check your phone, your brain pays a switching cost. These micro costs accumulate, weakening focus and reducing cognitive stamina. Protecting your brain means controlling its inputs. You must decide what gets access to your attention and what does not. Eliminating digital clutter is as important as eliminating physical clutter. When your brain has fewer competing stimuli, it can direct more energy toward learning. Environmental design matters as well. The spaces you work and learn in influence your brain's ability to focus. Bright screens, noisy environments, cluttered desks, and chaotic surroundings create cognitive noise. A clean, orderly space sends a signal of clarity and control. Lighting matters. Air quality matters. Even seating matters. You're not just creating a place to learn. You're creating a place where your brain feels supported enough to perform its best. Another overlooked component of brain protection is rest. Not just sleep, but cognitive rest. Your brain cannot operate in sustained high-intensity mode without recovery. Rest includes relaxation, daydreaming, nature exposure, and leisure activities that don't demand structured thinking. These moments allow your brain to reorganize, integrate, and reset. Many breakthroughs in science, art, and invention have occurred during unstructured rest, not during intense effort. Rest is not wasted time. It's processing time. Social connection also influences cognitive health. Your brain is wired for interaction, collaboration, and communication. Isolation can weaken cognitive sharpness, while meaningful conversation stimulates memory, language, empathy, and reasoning. Even teaching and discussing what you learn activates retention pathways. Surrounding yourself with curious, growth-oriented people enhances cognitive resilience. Surrounding yourself with negativity drains it. Lastly, mental framing matters. A brain that is constantly fed helplessness, fear, or defeat deteriorates. A brain that is fed possibility, challenge, and purpose strengthens. Internal dialogue shapes neural patterns. Stressful thinking produces stress chemistry. Empowering thinking produces adaptive chemistry. Protecting your brain means protecting the narrative running inside it. The point is simple. Your brain's performance is not just a matter of intelligence. It's a matter of environment, lifestyle, and habit. When you protect the biological foundation, learning becomes easier. When you neglect it, no amount of strategy will compensate. If you want to upgrade your brain, you must treat it like the powerful instrument it is. Nurture it, support it, protect it, and it will repay you with clarity, memory, and capacity for years to come. Chapter 14. Make technology your ally, not your master. We live in a time where technology can multiply your cognitive abilities if used wisely, or quietly erode them if used carelessly. Tools that were once limited to researchers, scholars, and high-level thinkers are now in everyone's pocket. You can store knowledge, retrieve information, organize ideas, schedule tasks, manage memories, track habits, and even simulate thinking with the help of software. But here's the critical distinction. Technology should enhance thinking, not replace it. When technology becomes a substitute for cognition instead of an amplifier of cognition, your brain stops growing. To use technology correctly, you must first understand its role. Your brain has strengths and weaknesses. It excels at creativity, pattern recognition, reasoning, abstraction, and emotional evaluation. It struggles with storage, retrieval of vast data, error-free calculations, and long-term organization of knowledge. Technology excels precisely where your brain struggles. Tools can store thousands of facts, reminders, references, and frameworks without cognitive decay. The goal, then, is to partner with technology. Let it handle what your brain finds inefficient so your brain can focus on what only it can do. However, using technology without intention leads to cognitive outsourcing. Outsourcing isn't inherently bad. Your phone remembering phone numbers is harmless. But when your brain outsources too much, it stops building internal structure. Many people rely on search engines for answers they could have learned. They rely on notes for ideas they never processed. They rely on reminders for commitments they never internalized. The result is a brain that becomes dependent rather than empowered. Tools become crutches instead of extensions. To avoid this, treat technology as scaffolding. Scaffolding supports the formation of skill, but is removed once the skill is stable. For example, spaced repetition apps are a powerful tool for long-term memory, but you must still retrieve knowledge actively. Note-taking software is useful for storing information, but you must still reason about that information. Task managers are useful for organized priorities, but you must still decide what matters. If the tool removes cognitive work entirely, it removes cognitive growth. Technology can also enhance learning speed through organization. Tools like digital note systems, mind mapping software, annotation tools, and flashcard apps allow you to capture, categorize, and review ideas efficiently. Without organization, knowledge sits in chaos. With organization, knowledge becomes accessible. Your brain loves structure, and technology can provide that structure faster than pen and paper when used deliberately. Another category of technological enhancement involves tracking. Data around sleep, focus, habits, reading time, or performance can show patterns that your mind cannot easily detect. Your brain experiences life subjectively. Technology reveals it objectively. When you see measurable patterns like how sleep affects your productivity or how often you actually practice a skill, your decisions become sharper. Awareness improves behavior, and improved behavior upgrades your brain. But technology must not be allowed to fracture attention. Many digital tools are designed to hijack your brain rather than support it. Notifications fragment concentration. Social platforms reward novelty-seeking over deep thinking. Endless feeds encourage consumption over creation. Your brain becomes reactive instead of reflective. A powerful rule for brain protection is to use technology deliberately rather than habitually. Tools you choose to open are allies. Tools that open themselves are enemies. Another important principle is to separate cognitive tools from cognitive entertainment. Cognitive entertainment gives the illusion of learning. Watching educational videos, listening to intellectual content, browsing articles, but without engagement, application, or retention. Cognitive tools, on the other hand, require action, note-taking, flashcards, writing, practicing, planning, teaching. Both have value, but only one upgrades your brain. The smartest learners are not the ones who consume the most information. They are the ones who convert consumption into skill. To make technology a multiplier rather than a distraction, create boundaries. For instance, designate certain tools for output: writing, note systems, spaced repetition, problem solving, and certain tools for input: books, lectures, courses. Keep them separated. Input alone does not produce growth. Output forces retrieval, synthesis, and application. When your brain produces, it learns. Another practice is to integrate technology with analog methods. You might brainstorm on paper, but store organized notes digitally. You might practice recall with flashcards, but reflect in a journal. The hybrid approach gives you the benefits of both worlds: technology for storage and efficiency, analog for depth and presence. The most important shift is this: see technology as part of your cognitive ecosystem, not as a replacement for it. Your brain is not meant to work alone, but it is also not meant to surrender. A calculator doesn't make you worse at math if you understand the principles. A note system doesn't weaken memory if you still retrieve and summarize. A spaced repetition app doesn't reduce thinking if you still reason about the material. A tool becomes harmful only when it eliminates the struggle necessary for growth. Ultimately, the purpose of technology in learning is amplification. Amplify your attention by blocking distractions. Amplify your memory through structured review. Amplify your productivity through organizing tasks. Amplify your thinking by freeing cognitive space. Amplify your creativity by storing raw material for future ideas. When used in this way, technology becomes one of the greatest cognitive multipliers of our era. But your brain must remain the driver. Tools are extensions of thought, not replacements for thought. If you maintain that relationship, you will harness the full power of technology while preserving and strengthening the extraordinary capabilities of your mind. Chapter 15. Build a brain that never stops growing. The true upgrade of your brain does not happen in a week, a month, or even a year. It happens across a lifetime. The most powerful learners are not the ones who study intensely for brief seasons. They are the ones who never stop learning, who never stop refining, who never stop expanding. They adopt the identity of a lifelong learner, and because of that identity, their knowledge compounds. The compounding of knowledge is one of the greatest advantages a human being can acquire. It makes learning easier, thinking sharper, memory stronger, and creativity more effortless. The compound brain is not built by accident. It is built by consistency. A lifelong learner understands that knowledge is fuel. It fuels decisions, opportunities, careers, relationships, problem-solving, and personal evolution. They don't learn because they were told to, or because a curriculum demanded it, or because an exam was scheduled. They learn because they recognize what learning gives them. It gives them leverage. It gives them adaptability. It gives them clarity in a world that is constantly shifting. The person who learns continuously will always outperform the person who relies solely on past knowledge. The world evolves. Your brain must evolve with it. One of the biggest mindset shifts toward becoming a lifelong learner is curiosity. Curiosity is the engine of sustained learning. Without curiosity, learning feels like work. With curiosity, learning feels like exploration. Children learn rapidly because they are curious about everything. Adults often lose that curiosity because they trade wonder for certainty. They believe they already know enough. They cling to fixed beliefs. They stop asking questions. When curiosity dies, your brain stagnates. To revive learning, you must revive questioning. Ask why things are the way they are. Ask how systems work. Ask what principles lie behind the surface. Curiosity is not childish. It is intelligent. A lifelong learner also builds routines around learning. They don't wait for free time or inspiration. They schedule learning into their life the way others schedule entertainment. This doesn't mean studying all day. It means feeding your brain consistently. 10 pages a day for a year is 3,650 pages. One insightful podcast a day for a year is 365 ideas. One new skill practiced for 20 minutes a day for a year is over 120 hours of focused improvement. Compounding works in small increments. Your brain grows through repetition and time. But lifelong learning is not only about absorbing information, it's about revisiting, connecting, applying, and refining. The compound brain does not treat knowledge as separate events. It treats knowledge as a growing ecosystem where new ideas plug into existing frameworks. Each year, the ecosystem becomes richer, more organized, and more powerful. Learning that seemed difficult years ago suddenly becomes easier because the structures to support it are already in place. This is why the knowledgeable continue accelerating. Knowledge builds pathways for new knowledge. To maintain lifelong learning, you must also remain adaptable. Adaptability is the willingness to update your beliefs when presented with new evidence. Many people cling to outdated beliefs even when they stop being useful. They defend what they know instead of expanding what they know. A lifelong learner views their beliefs as tools, not identities. They adjust theories when new data arrives. They revise their frameworks. The brain that updates grows. The brain that refuses stagnates. Another key to becoming a lifelong learner is balancing depth and breadth. Depth gives you mastery. Breadth gives you flexibility. Depth makes you strong in a domain. Breadth allows you to connect domains. The most creative thinkers are often individuals with deep expertise in one field and broad curiosity across many others. Innovation often emerges at the intersections, where concepts from one field merge with concepts from another. A compound brain becomes both a specialist and a connector. Lifelong learners also understand that teaching reinforces learning. They share ideas. They discuss concepts. They explain what they've learned. Teaching solidifies memory, clarifies understanding, and spreads insight. A world built on sharing knowledge accelerates the growth of all minds involved. Each conversation becomes a training ground for refinement. To sustain lifelong learning, you must also surround yourself with people who value growth. A stagnant environment kills curiosity. A complacent circle kills ambition. But an environment full of thinkers, readers, builders, creators, and explorers ignites learning, by proximity. You rise to the level of the intellectual environment you inhabit. If you want your brain to keep growing, surround it with other growing brains. Finally, lifelong learning requires the acceptance that you will always be a beginner in something. Many adults avoid learning new skills because they don't want to feel incompetent. But discomfort is the gateway to growth. Being a beginner is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of intelligence. Beginners learn quickly because they are unafraid to ask questions, unafraid to make mistakes, and unafraid to adjust. The lifelong learner keeps this spirit alive, regardless of age or status. When learning becomes part of your identity, your brain compounds. Ideas connect, skills deepen, memory strengthens, creativity expands, curiosity stays alive, and life becomes richer. Because a well-fed mind creates a well-built future. The compound brain is not measured by how much it knows in a moment. It is measured by how much it continues to grow over time. Conclusion: the mind you build is the life you live. Upgrading your brain is not a single technique, a clever trick, or a temporary project. It is a way of approaching life. It's choosing to treat your mind not as something fixed, but as something flexible. Something that can be trained, strengthened, and shaped over time. The brain you have today is the result of years of habits, environments, and choices. The brain you will have in the future will be shaped the same way. Once you understand that, learning becomes less of a task and more of an opportunity. Every idea, every skill, every challenge becomes a chance to evolve. Through this audiobook, we've explored the full journey of cognitive upgrading. We began by understanding how your brain learns, how attention, understanding, and active engagement allow information to become memory, and memory to become skill. We discovered the power of techniques like spaced repetition, association, transformation, and teaching. These tools are not academic theories. They are practical, proven methods for strengthening your mind's capacity to absorb and retain knowledge. But learning strategies alone are not enough. Your brain requires systems. It requires structure. It requires repetition, reflection, and retrieval. It requires a lifestyle that supports cognitive performance, sleep, nutrition, movement, environment, stress management, and digital boundaries. A brilliant strategy cannot compensate for a tired brain. A remarkable mind cannot thrive in a chaotic environment. When you protect your brain biologically and support it behaviorally, it begins to perform at levels that once felt out of reach. We also examined the relationship between knowledge and action. Knowledge that stays trapped in your mind becomes intellectual clutter. Knowledge that turns into application becomes ability. Application is where learning becomes real, where neurons strengthen through practice, where feedback sharpens performance, and where identity begins to shift from someone who knows into someone who can. Skill is the end state of learning, and skills build the life you want. Now we arrive at the final transformation, the identity of a lifelong learner. Your brain does not upgrade through intensity alone. It upgrades through consistency. Small habits practiced repeatedly create compounding growth. Curiosity fuels that growth. Adaptability protects it. Reflection accelerates it. And teaching spreads it. When learning becomes part of who you are, you no longer ask, "How long will this take?" Instead, you ask, "How far can I go?" That is the mindset of a compound brain. As you move forward, remember this one truth. The greatest advantage you can build is a brain that continues to improve. Skills decay, Trends fade, tools change, but the person who knows how to learn will always rise, always adapt, and always find their way. Learning is the master skill, the one that makes every other skill possible. Your brain is capable of more than you've seen so far. It can become faster. It can become sharper. It can become more resilient, more curious, more disciplined, and more powerful. All it needs is direction and commitment. The journey does not end here. In many ways, this is where it begins. You now have the framework. You now have the tools. You now have the understanding. What you do with them is up to you. But know this, every time you choose attention over distraction, understanding over surface-level consumption, practice over passive consumption, you are upgrading your brain. You are building a mind that works for you instead of against you. And when you build that kind of mind, there is no limit to what you can achieve, no goal too complex, no skill too difficult, no challenge too overwhelming, because you've learned how to learn, and that changes everything. So go build the brain you deserve. Go build the life that brain can create, and never stop growing. The world needs minds like yours, minds that never settle, minds that never stop asking questions, minds that turn knowledge into capability and capability into impact. This is your time. This is your upgrade. This is your opportunity to become the lifelong learner you were always meant to be. Let's make it happen.